Hello and welcome to the Spiked podcast. I'm Fraser Myers, delighted to be joined as ever by Spike's editor, Tom Slater.
Hello.
We'll also be joined by reform consultant Gawain Towler to discuss these seismic local election results. Plus, we'll talk about Tony Blair's turn against net zero and the kneecapping of free speech. So, at the time of recording, Reform has won the Runcorn by-election by a razor-type margin of 6 votes. Reform has also won the mayoralty in Lincolnshire with Andrea Jenkins. Labour has held on to 3 mayoral races at the time of recording, and many more results to come. Gawain, you were up in Runcorn, you were on the campaign trail. Could you sense that there was a mood of change in the air?
Yes, but I honestly didn't think it was going to be quite that much change. It was literally a knife edge. The recount from 4 votes to 6 votes is astonishing. However, the mound that we climbed was colossal. And what I think you're seeing is a teal tide is rising across the country. And what I think one of the most extraordinary things is if you look at the mayoralties, which are serious positions, they actually have power and budgets and can do stuff. It's that in every single one, Reform came second or first. We beat all the other parties in every other mayoralty. We didn't stand in them before. I mean, in Newcastle, in Tynecastle, Northern Tyneside one, we didn't even campaign. That was our 6th target one. We missed it by 440 votes. In Doncaster, only 600 and something votes. The West of England, according to the polls, we were sitting outside of the shed. We came second, beating the Greens, who dominate Bristol, beating Lib Dems, who dominate Bath. It is an astonishing series of results. And so, who knows what's going to happen in the councils up and down the country. But there were a lot of by-elections last night as well. And we picked up a seat with a huge stonking win in Bridgend. Big win in Harlow, which is an Essex County Council, which of course is one of the cancelled councils. Didn't have their elections this year as they should. I think in Staffordshire there's 20 seats to count, and if we get 4 of them, we take the council completely. In Northumberland, we wiped Labour out of places like Blythe, and are now the second largest group on the council after the Tories. It is something phenomenal is going on out there. Now, it's only councils, really. It's only councils, and that doesn't change all the weather. But it certainly suggests that the weather vane is spinning, and it's spinning in our direction.
And crucially, obviously, a lot of the, when people talk about Reform or an insurgent party on the right, they assume that it's competing with the Tories for votes. But actually, you're taking the fight to Labour. That's clearly what these elections show.
Clearly, in Runcorn, I don't think taking the fight to the Tories wouldn't have done us much good. We had to take the fight to Labour, and we did. But if you think, most Labour voters up and down the country, I'm not talking necessarily sort of public sector worker, university town nexus, which is the core vote of Labour these days, but what used to be their core votes are patriotic. They don't want to see mass migration. They are uncomfortable with the way that immigration has hit what we think it made a significant impact on housing. Net zero is driving out employment, driving jobs abroad. Even Gary Smith of the GMB is agreeing with us that net zero has gone too far and is crucifying working class communities. And so Labour, with Miliband and his what we think is bonkers approach to those things, is an anathema. Most people in these northern Midlands towns, I wouldn't describe them as woke.
Yeah,
That's definitely a key dividing line.
They may have voted Labour, but they're not woke. They are not sort of this public school, university-educated Labour that goes around saying "be kind" while at the same time being vile. It's almost testament. If you see somebody saying "be kind," that they're a stinker, and this contempt they have for ordinary people. And well, those ordinary people, guess what? They're voting for us now.
And in a lot of the coverage as well, Gawain, there's been a lot of discussion about how the old kind of left-right doesn't really hold anymore. You saw Sir John Curtis this morning saying a lot of those cultural issues are now much more significant. And it's hard to really overstate how important these local elections are. It's very rare that a set of local elections are given such significance. But this is the most serious challenge to the party duopoly in 100 years, isn't it?
It signifies the growth and the appearance of a new party on the scene. It really does. And that's why they're significant. One of the things we've always been, you're good in polling, but you're dreadful in polls.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? Ballot boxes are being filled with the X next to our name. And that is real. These are real votes, not just dream votes in a polling in a polling company. And I think it is clear that Labour would have expected after the election that this high watermark Tory, the last time these elections went down in 21, which is the real high when the Tories were winning Hartlepool in the by-election. I thought it was quite telling. The first vote of the night was a Hartlepool one that went to Reform, the first ward, Blair. But it is clear that Labour would have assumed that it would have picked up with the Tories having such a devastating hit to their popularity since 21. But Labour are down too already. Their numbers are already down on the night, which, given they've just won a general election with a massive majority, must be frustrating for them.
And Gawain, I mean, you probably hate this question, but this is the talk of the mainstream media, the talk of a Reform Tory pact. What do you make of that discussion? I can see from your facial expression how horrified you are by it already. But what's your take on it?
They're going to be talking about this for the next 4 years, aren't they? And they've been talking about it for a year. They've been talking about it for over a year anyhow. It was interesting to me that I've only heard people from the Tories talk about it. I've not heard anybody from Reform talk about it. Though this morning at 2:30, Natasha Clark, LBC's poll-ed, told me that she'd had Reform people saying that they were interested in a pact. And I said, really? I've literally heard nobody, both at the senior level or at a junior level, even considering a pact. They realise that a good 50% of our members are people who left the Tories because they were so disgusted with the Tories. There's this strange idea that if we're on 26, the Tories on 23, you add those two numbers together and you get 49. Rubbish. You get about 32. Because a significant number of Tories would disappear over the fence to the Lib Dems, and a significant number of reformers would say, pox on you, we left the Tories because they're rubbish. And it just, these numbers, they are not greater than their parts. They are significantly less than their parts. And there is no purpose for Reform to have a deal with the Tories, not now and not going forward. Now, that being said, good people of goodwill need to talk. And we'll continue to talk. We will. One of the lovely things about politics is there's no such thing as copyright on ideas. Other people have good ideas, take them. I have absolutely no problem in that. And so, therefore, people of goodwill should continue talking, and I'm sure will.
Gawain, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Sorry I was so late.
No, not at all.
Problem.
Yes.
Okay. So that was Gawain Towler with the Reform UK View, joining us from a very, very busy schedule in his cab. Tom, let's broaden things out a bit. What is your broader take on things?
Well, it's that this isn't just a remarkable night for Reform, though absolutely it is for all of the reasons that Gawain was talking about there. Not just this by-election victory, which is the first time that any of the sort of Farageist parties have won a by-election from a sort of standing start. Obviously, they had those two Tory UKIP switchers before Brexit, who then contested their seats, but that's a very different proposition from trying to take on the seat yourself. That was Labour's, 49th safest seat. This was no mean feat. And the fact that, as Gawain was talking about there, how close they ran things in some of those other mayoralties is really significant. And that for the party really suggests that it's on a new footing now, that it's seemingly much more bedded into various parts of the country, that it has more of a ground game, and all of that I think is going to be really striking. But it's also the broader context here, of course, is the fact that the party duopoly, which has ruled British politics for 100 years now is breaking down to a degree that we haven't seen before.
Yeah.
You've got constantly in opinion polls, Tories and Labour failing to be over 50% of the vote combined. That is incredibly significant. You've got Reform consistently now polling at 25%. There was always a kind of question, but would that materialise into actual gains at local elections or general elections? We now know the answer to that question, although it is very early days. And also, the more that the party duopoly breaks down, the more that first past the post ceases to protect them. I mean, Simon Kellner, one of the kind of leading pollsters, has made this point that whereas previously it was believed that you really had to get close to about 30% of the vote nationally if you wanted, as a kind of insurgent party, if you wanted to overcome the hurdles that first past the post puts in front of you, it's now looking more like 25%, which is where Reform are. So this is, all bets are off. And I think it's, obviously there are the more immediate factors, Farage throwing his hat back into the ring, the party quote unquote professionalising itself and all the rest of it. But clearly there is a broader tectonic shift which has been going on here. The breakdown in the traditional parties' coalitions, the way in which Brexit put a coach and horses through both of their coalitions in different ways, particularly prying away working class voters, the remaining working class voters from the Labour coalition, those people being up for grabs in a way that they weren't before, catapulted towards new populist alternatives, not least because of the mix of cultural condescension and political fraud committed against them on various different issues, whether that be Brexit or immigration or what have you. It's very rare that a local election has this much significance, but I don't think it's overstating it's the case to say that this one is truly historic.
Definitely. And, just looking at some of the losses of Labour vote share, even when they've held on, in all of the mayoral races, they've gone down by double digits on every occasion. This is catastrophic for the current government. I don't think we've ever seen a government lose popularity so quickly. Again, not just in polling, but these are real elections.
No, absolutely. I think it's had the most kind of precipitous fall in popularity of a new government in recent times. It's really not normal for a government which is superficially sitting on such a large majority to have proven itself to be so unpopular so quickly. Obviously, there are choices that have been made. If you look at what the more critical noises coming out of certain Labour figures at the moment, it's very much questions about winter fuel payments and the disability allowances and so on. But it's clearly not just the mistakes that they've made in office. This was a remarkably unpopular majority government that was elected last time around. There was a very low turnout last time around. People kind of acquiesced to Labour running things for a while, not least because many people who took a chance on the Conservatives in 2019 felt particularly betrayed by them. But this was never a very enthusiastic election. It was a kind of the pinnacle, I think, of the way in which politics has been done for some time, which is that you've got parties of the sort of technocratic, supposed sensible centre governing without much of a mandate, but being able to stay in place off the back of widespread public, lack of engagement, lack of interest for understandable reasons in the political process. But as soon as you've got alternatives, as soon as you've got the Reform insurgency really starting to take place, and of course also in other places, the fracturing of the party to its left in the form of the Greens. We'll see how they get on, the Greens and the Lib Dems, over the course of the day as more of these things come forward. But I do think talk of the multi-party, five-party politics that we're moving into now is significant, but I think it's also a way of deflecting from the fact that really Reform is the story of this election, no matter what way people want to splice it.
This episode of the Spike podcast is sponsored by Shopify. Now, running a small business can be a real challenge. You've got to keep on top of your stock. You've got to keep your customers happy. You've got to know what your competitors are up to so you can keep that edge. But with the best software in the world, this is all entirely possible. And it sounds like this. Shopify is that kind of software. Already, it's been a game changer for millions of businesses around the world, from huge companies like Gymshark and Mattel to small companies specializing in every field imaginable. You're never too big, too small, or too niche to need the help of Shopify. One of my favorite things about Shopify is how good it is for marketing. No matter how much digital or business experience you have, it always feels like you've got an entire creative team behind you. Whether it's with email campaigns or those all-important social media forums, Shopify makes sure you can reach every potential customer wherever they may be. Shopify also takes care of the look and design of your website. It comes with hundreds of easy-to-use templates so you can find the right aesthetic that perfectly matches your brand. And once you're ready to start selling, Shopify is packed with expertise in everything from managing your inventory to international shipping. It really does cover all of your bases. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Turn your business idea into with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your £1 per month trial period and start selling today at shopify.co.uk/spiked. Go to shopify.co.uk/spiked. That's shopify.co.uk/spiked. So Tony Blair has made quite a striking intervention against net zero. He says that basically current net zero policies are doomed to fail. And he has recognised that voters are asking why they're making so many sacrifices for when essentially the UK, much of the West, actually makes very little contribution to climate change. Tom, this is a hugely significant change, not least because Blair has been one of the great evangelists for net zero and climate policy.
No, absolutely. I mean, not for the first time, Tony Blair has made problems for his party by saying just something vaguely commonsensical for a change. You know, I mean, you could call this preface that he wrote to a report produced by his, Tony Blair Institute for Global Regime Change, whatever it's called, which was trying to draw attention to the fact that essentially there's just no public buy-in with a lot of the measures which are being put forward, and also fundamentally that in the context of the global south rising, this is just a non-starter. So the fundamental points he's making, as you say, is that voters in the West, particularly in a country like Britain, are struggling to understand why they should be putting up with so much when it's going to have a negligible impact on global emissions. Again, statement of the bleeding obvious. And also that people in developing countries are looking at the demands being placed on them by supranational institutions, by Western NGOs, saying that whilst we might have developed using these fossil fuels, you're going to have to go a harder, more difficult, untested route. They're saying, no, thank you. And that is a political problem, which is just, you can't square that circle. It's a bit of a confused intervention insofar as he does call much of the debate irrational. He does call for the sorts of things that more sensible people in the environmental debate have been calling for some time: nuclear power, adaptation to climate, as well as some more kind of classically Blairite technocrat things like we just got to have loads of AI and that will sort everything, because that seems to be his sort of answer to absolutely everything.
AI and ID cards.
Absolutely. That's how you sort the world out. But on top of that, there's also, a passage in there where he talks about how renewable energy is essential, it's cost effective, even though it's delivering in the UK sky high energy prices, and just across the water, historic blackouts on the Iberian Peninsula, quite plausibly. So it's one of those things where it's a confused intervention, which has allowed him to row back a little bit and suggest he wasn't directly criticising his party, but clearly it doesn't. It's a crack in that kind of elite climate consensus, which, as you say, Blair was very much a part of forging back when he was still in power.
Yeah, it does seem that the sort of dominoes are falling a little bit on this issue. I mean, we had Kemi Badenoch saying the Tories they're not against net zero per se, but they're against the 2050 target. I mean, there have been so many instances this year of whether it's the collapse of British Steel or the collapse of Port Talbot or the collapse of the British car industry. There's been so many events where you'd think that this is the moment to wake up and smell the coffee, and you hear sort of incremental shifts from either the Labour Party or the Tories, but we never quite have that full-on realisation that actually this whole endeavour, the idea of essentially moving towards renewables means using less energy, putting up the price of energy, is actually quite, is in and of itself a folly and should be taken on more forcefully. No,
absolutely. And the idea that this was ever going to be a saleable political proposition, particularly when people started to wake up to the costs of these policies, which are often kind of hidden from them or a lot easier to absorb in better economic times. I think what's happened over the course of the past 5 years in particular is we've had, economic shocks, war, pestilence, and so on, is what has been clear for a long time, really, which is that environmentalism is like a luxury the West can no longer afford to indulge. And it's a fantasy that the developing world can see right through. They can see that no one has developed using these pie-in-the-sky technologies. The question is sort of what happens now. I mean, as confused as it is, Blair's intervention is interesting because he's kind of baffled as to why you've got governments and supranational institutions doubling down on policies which are both impractical and unpopular. Yeah. The reason that is the case is because this is a question of ideology to a large extent. You've had a lot of politicians who don't stand for very much. You've got a lot of supranational institutions who want to accrue more power for themselves. So the idea that they can refashion themselves as the saviours of the planet and introduce policies which necessarily have to be imposed over the heads of nation states and citizens appeals to them quite intensely. You've also got a kind of more general establishment misanthropy, which has been building and kind of repackaging. It's been there, it's kind of always there to some extent, but it's repackaged itself in kind of green, faux progressive form. And you've also got a kind of capitalist class, which has been often struggles to kind of stick up for itself, to justify its own existence. And so it's been handed via the green thing, both a kind of potential moral glow if they really lean into all of this, but also some quite tasty subsidy-fueled business opportunities. Yeah. So there's a reason why this is very hard to dislodge. But at the same time, as you were saying at the beginning, this agenda is colliding now with economic reality and ordinary people in a way that it hasn't done previously. And at some point, something's got to give.
So the Belfast rap trio Kneecap are being investigated by counter-terror police, and there are calls from figures in the UK government to have them pulled from Glastonbury. This is in response to a number of comments that have been essentially footage coming out of their gigs where they've said things like up Hamas, up Hezbollah, the only good Tory is a dead Tory, and kill your local MP. Tom, I mean, obviously these are not big or clever statements, but it does seem to me that we get into this trap in the UK in particular, where if someone says something vaguely distasteful or irritating, then the immediate response is that the police must get involved, or their livelihoods must be destroyed. What have you made of this row?
I think at this point, everyone just needs to suspend anything that they feel about this odious, quite embarrassing rap trio, and just recognise what is going on here. You've got the counter-terror police investigating rappers for being offensive. You've got the Labour government demanding, in the form of Dan Jarvis, that they be purged from the Glastonbury Festival lineup. This has clearly gone too far now. Like, this is not purely about remonstrating with a few idiots saying repulsive things purposefully. This is now really breached into a serious free speech story, which if anyone wants to be consistent on this, needs to be very clear that we can't accept something like this happening. It should go without saying that Kneecap are loathsome in so many respects. They're also just incredibly cringe. That's one of the reasons why I find this clampdown kind of particularly irksome, is the fact that it plays to their grift, it plays to their shtick. These are three Belfast rappers, kind of theatre kids, really, cosplaying as sort of edgy hoods for the titillation of the English middle classes. It's a shtick. It's embarrassing. And I think handing them the kind of, again, the kind of edgy status that they so clearly crave is we're onto a loser. Now, of course, the law is the law. We do have laws in this country which are against glorifying terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. There have been people who have been locked up in this country for far less than praising Islamo-fascist jihadists and calling for MPs to be killed. At the same time, I think the answer to two-tier speech policing is not to say we should enforce the speech codes more evenly, that we should double down on the bad laws that we currently have. No one is buying it, really, when Kneecap put out their statement earlier this week saying we've never supported Hamas or Hezbollah, even though they've said up Hamas and up Hezbollah, and even posed with Hassan Nasrallah's writings. And there was a chant off stage.
Yeah, and there was a chant at one of their gigs that was like, ooh, Hezbollah.
Yeah. No one's really buying it. But at the same time, they do make a point, which is to say these are things of performance.
Yeah.
I mean, are we suggesting that the counter-terror police should take an interest in plays in which people are, taking on the character of a kind of Islamist apologist? Creative freedom is a significant thing, and also just freedom of speech fundamentally. Whilst, yes, these are comments which are far more outrageous and purposely so than a lot of the speech policing discussions we might have, it doesn't change the fact that unless you're talking about incitement, direct incitement, which has to be very tightly defined in my view, then this is a matter of opinion, and it's something that should be met with mockery and criticism rather than the counter-terror police.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that these three guys, I mean, I'm pretty sure the one that wears like a little tea cozy balaclava thing.
It's much more tea cozy than balaclava, is it? I don't think that was what he was going for.
He's a school teacher. These are not like, or ex-school teacher, I should say. They earn enough money now. But, these are not dangerous people. The people at their gigs are not dangerous people. This is a posh Guardianista crowd being titillated by this kind of revolutionary cosplaying. And that's all it is. It is cosplaying.
Yeah. And sort of girls from Cheltenham Ladies College trying to get back at daddy by singing up the raw or something. That's basically what you're dealing with here. The idea that these Gen Z vegans who are going to these shows, who've probably never thrown a punch in their lives, are actually a potential terror threat and will be incited into acts of violence. It's just obviously not the case.
Yeah.
And let's not indulge that, and let's not throw out free speech in the process.
Thank you so much for watching the Spiked podcast. We'll be back at the same time next week. In the meantime, why not subscribe to Spike's YouTube channel and then click the bell so you're always alerted whenever there's some new content. Spiked is producing more videos than ever, from podcasts like this one to interviews to our series of polemics. You really, really don't want to miss out on it. Plus, to get your daily dose of Spiked, just go to spiked-online.com. That's our website at spiked-online.com.